The sterile air of the lawyer's office presses in, cold and unforgiving. It smells faintly of old paper and polished wood, a smell that will forever be seared into my memory. The document rests on the dark surface of the desk, stark white against the deep grain. My name isn't on it. Not where it should be. Not anywhere that matters. My hand trembles as I reach for the glass of water, the ice clinking like small, distant bells of doom. The lawyer's voice is a low drone, facts delivered with polite finality, but the words barely penetrate the fog forming in my brain. Something about transfers, signatures, legally binding, everything, all of it,
Gone.
not misplaced, not tied up, but explicitly rerouted away from me. The silence in the room after he finishes speaking is heavier than concrete, suffocating. I look at the document again, the official stamps, the complex language I barely understand but whose outcome is brutally clear. The names listed are my parents. And my brother. Their names, where mine should have been, are a physical blow. It feels like falling, endless and silent, into a black well. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Before the sterile air, before the document, before the lawyer's quiet verdict, there was just
Life.
normal, or what I thought was normal. There were Sunday dinners that stretched into twilight, the clatter of forks on plates, the low murmur of conversation punctuated by laughter. There were holidays that followed a predictable, comforting rhythm, the specific scent of pine needles in December, the sizzle of the grill in July. We were a family, flawed, sure, like any other, with our unspoken tensions and minor squabbles, but a unit. Or so I believed. My brother, Mark, was always the golden child, the one who excelled effortlessly, who charmed everyone he met. I was quieter, more introspective, finding solace in books and my own thoughts. It wasn't an overtly competitive dynamic, not on the surface. We were siblings. We shared childhood memories, scraped knees, inside jokes. Or we had once. As we got older, the gap between us seemed to widen, a slow, almost imperceptible drift. He moved through the world with a confidence I envied and rarely felt. I navigated it with caution, observing, analyzing. My parents were traditional. They valued appearances, success, stability. They loved us, I didn't doubt that, not then. But there was always a leaning towards Mark, a quiet pride in his achievements that felt different from the affection they showed me. It was subtle, easily dismissed as typical parent-child dynamics. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Maybe I was just sensitive. Grandpa, though. Grandpa was different. He was my anchor in the family, the one who seemed to see me, truly see me, beyond the quiet exterior. He had a mischievous glint in his eye, a sly humor, and a deep understanding of the world that went beyond balance sheets and social climbing. He taught me things the others didn't, about quiet strength, about not always showing your hand, about the value of things that couldn't be easily counted. He traveled extensively in his younger years, spoke of places most people only read about. He'd tell me stories, his voice low and conspiratorial, hinting at adventures and secrets. He wasn't as involved in the family business as my parents, who built it from the ground up, turning Grandpa's initial venture into a considerable enterprise. He seemed content to let them handle the day-to-day, preferring his books, his garden, and his quiet chats with me. He passed away a few years ago, leaving a void that no one else could fill. His will was straightforward, his personal effects divided, a small sum to a charity, and the rest of his estate, primarily invested, was left to be managed within the family's overall financial structure.
I didn't think much about it.
It was all just part of the family pot, the future inheritance that felt abstract and distant. We didn't talk about money openly, not really. It was understood to be there, a cushion, a legacy. Something for the future. Our future. Mark's and mine. The disruption didn't arrive like a storm, but like a chill that crept into the bones. It started with small things. Parents being evasive about finances, quick changes of topic when the future was mentioned. Mark becoming more proprietorial. He'd make comments about when I take over, or restructuring things, I brushed them off. Sibling bravado, maybe. But the feeling of unease grew, a knot tightening in my stomach I couldn't ignore. Then came the meeting. Not a casual dinner, but a formal sit-down in the living room. The air felt thick, heavy. My parents sat on the sofa, side by side, looking strangely unified and distant. Mark was in an armchair, leaning back, a look of almost smug confidence I hadn't seen before. They started talking about the future, about simplifying things, about ensuring a smooth transition. My father did most of the talking, his voice steady, formal, like he was reading a business report. My mother nodded along, her gaze fixed somewhere past my shoulder. Mark just watched me, a faint smile playing on his lips. And then they dropped it. Not gently.
Just.
Stated it. A legal restructuring. They had transferred ownership of the significant family assets, the business, the properties, the main investment portfolios, into a new trust. A trust managed solely by Mark. And he was the sole beneficiary. My name was not mentioned. Not as a trustee, not as a beneficiary. It wasn't a distribution, they explained, not yet. It was a realignment of ownership for efficiency, for Mark to take the reins fully. My mother added, her voice slightly softer but no less firm, that they would, of course, take care of me, provide for me. Help me out if I needed it. Like a dependent, not an equal inheritor. The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Take care of me? They had just taken away everything I had ever expected, ever been led to believe was our shared future. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Stunned, hollow disbelief. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. I must have heard them wrong. I stammered, asking for clarification. The family assets? All of them? What about me? My father repeated the facts, patiently, like explaining something simple to a child. Yes, the primary assets. It's all consolidated under Mark's management now. It makes the most sense for the business going forward. Don't worry, we'll make sure you're comfortable. The word felt like an insult. Mark spoke then, his voice smooth, almost sympathetic, but the smirk never left his face. It's just practical. Streamlines things.
Less.
Complexity. Less complexity. Meaning, cutting me out was simpler than dividing things fairly. I left that meeting in a daze. The world outside the house felt alien, too bright, too loud. The knot in my stomach had twisted into a hard, painful ball. I walked for hours, not seeing where I was going, just needing to move, to put distance between myself and that room, those words, those faces. They couldn't have done this. Not my parents. Not to me. It felt like a betrayal so fundamental it shook the ground I stood on. This wasn't just about money. It was about value. About being seen, or rather, not being seen. About being deliberately erased from a future I thought we were building together. The first few days were a blur of desperate attempts to understand. I called my parents. They were unavailable.
Busy.
They reiterated their position in brief, clipped phone calls. It's handled. Trust us, trust them? The word felt obscene. I called Mark. He was harder to reach. When I finally got him on the phone, he was dismissive. Look, it's done. It's the right move for the business. You wouldn't understand the complexities. The complexities? The only complexity was their breathtaking cruelty. I tried to reason with him, to appeal to whatever sense of fairness he might possess, reminding him of our childhood, of Grandpa's values. He just laughed, a short, sharp sound. Times change. Grow up. I knew then that talking wasn't going to work. This wasn't a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. This was intentional.
Deliberate.
Calculated. My next step was obvious and terrifying, a lawyer. Finding one felt like admitting defeat, admitting the family I thought I had was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. I found an estate lawyer recommended by a friend. His office was where I ended up, sitting across from him, the documents spread between us. He explained the legality of it. My parents, as the owners of the assets, had the right to transfer them as gifts or into a trust, as long as they were of sound mind. The transfers had been executed correctly.
Cleanly.
There were mechanisms to challenge certain types of transfers, perhaps if there was evidence of undue influence or if it left a spouse destitute. But in this case, it was complicated. It would be expensive. It would be a long, drawn-out legal battle against my own parents and brother. A public, painful fight that could drain me financially and emotionally, with no guarantee of success. He was sympathetic, but pragmatic. Legally, he said, his voice quiet. They had the right to do this, had the right. Just like that, a lifetime of expectation, of assumed security, of family connection, was reduced to a matter of legal right. The lawyer's words were a cold dose of reality, bitter and hard to swallow. The early struggles weren't just about the financial shock. They were about the emotional fallout, the frantic scramble to make sense of a world that had just been turned upside down. Every conversation with parents or Mark felt like walking through a minefield. They'd act surprised by my distress, as if I was overreacting to a simple administrative change. "It's not like we left you penniless," my mother said once, her tone suggesting I was the one being unreasonable. "We'll help you out," the implication being I was now reliant on their charity, a stark contrast to the shared legacy I had always anticipated. Mark was worse. He didn't even bother with feigned sympathy. He started making oblique references to the responsibilities of ownership, the burden he now carried, positioning himself as the one doing the hard work while I was apparently expecting a handout. He seemed to revel in the new power dynamic. The family home, once a place of warmth, now felt like enemy territory. Visiting was a performance of strained politeness, underlying tension thick enough to cut with a knife. They talked about their plans for the business, for the properties, for his future, as if I wasn't even in the room. Each word was a deliberate twist of the knife. Trying to find a legal path felt like navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. The lawyer explained the complexities of challenging inter vivos transfers made while the person is alive, not through a will. The burden of proof would be on me to show grounds for setting the transfers aside. Undue influence? Hard to prove with competent adults. Lack of capacity? My parents were clearly lucid, chillingly so. Fraud? The documents were legitimate, signed by them. The lawyer explored every angle, but each path seemed to lead to a dead end or a financial black hole. The estimated costs of a protracted legal battle were staggering, more than I could afford based on my own modest savings and income. The thought of spending what little I had fighting a potentially losing battle was terrifying. It felt like they had anticipated this, structured the transfers in a way that was legally sound and financially prohibitive for me to challenge effectively. They had used the system, their wealth, and their knowledge of my own limited resources against me. The challenges kept rising, not just legally, but in every aspect of my life. The stress was constant, a dull ache behind my eyes, a tightness in my chest. Sleep offered little respite, filled with anxious dreams. My focus at work suffered, making me paranoid about losing my job, the last remaining source of independent income one had. Friends tried to be supportive, but explaining the situation felt shameful, like airing dirty laundry. How do you tell people your own parents effectively disinherited you and gave everything to your sibling? It sounded like something out of a soap opera, not my reality. The isolation deepened. I felt utterly alone, grappling with a betrayal so profound it warped my understanding of family, love, and trust. Every memory was now suspect. Were the subtle favors for Mark always leading to this? Was their affection for me conditional on my expected compliance? The midpoint shift wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow, agonizing realization that hardened into cold certainty. It came through piecing together fragments of conversations, remembering past incidents, and seeing the patterns I had previously overlooked or excused. One afternoon, on a brief, tense call, my father sighed, frustrated by my continued questions. "We just needed to make sure everything was secure," he said. "That it wouldn't be fragmented. That the business would continue strong without complications. The word hung there, heavy with unspoken meaning. Later, Mark, with a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand during a forced family dinner, made a barbed comment about people who expected handouts instead of building their own success. He looked directly at me when he said it. It wasn't just about Mark being the favored son, inheriting the kingdom. It was about preventing me from having an equal share, from having independent power or wealth derived from the family. It wasn't passive favoritism, it was active exclusion. They weren't just giving everything to Mark, they were deliberately ensuring I received nothing of substance, forcing me into a position of potential dependence, perhaps to control me, perhaps out of some twisted sense of justification for past perceived slights, or maybe simply because they valued Mark's path over mine to the point of cruelty. This realization changed everything. The hurt didn't disappear, but it was overlaid with a thick layer of cold, hard anger. This wasn't just unfair, it was malicious. They hadn't just made a difficult family decision, they had executed a strategic maneuver designed to disempower me. The naive hope that maybe, just maybe, they would see reason, that this was a terrible mistake, evaporated. It was deliberate. And if it was deliberate, then my response couldn't be emotional pleas or appeals to fairness. It had to be strategic too. The midpoint shift was the moment the temperature in my heart dropped to freezing, and the sorrow was replaced by a chilling resolve. I stopped trying to understand their motives in an emotional sense and started viewing it as a problem to be solved, a battle to be fought, not with tears or arguments, but with whatever tools I could find. The lawyer had laid out the conventional options, and they were bleak. I needed an unconventional one. The deepening crisis was the period where the weight of the situation became almost unbearable. Legal avenues seemed blocked. The financial strain was constant. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like I was drowning, thrashing against currents I couldn't fight. My lawyer, bless him, kept exploring possibilities, but his reports were increasingly discouraging. The paperwork was too clean. The intent, while morally reprehensible, was legally permissible. He spoke of the sheer difficulty and cost of litigation that could drag on for years. I saw my savings dwindling, the numbers on the page shrinking with alarming speed. Rent felt exorbitant. Groceries were a luxury. The future I had envisioned felt not just gone, but actively stolen, leaving behind a vast, empty pit. I started doing odd jobs on the side just to make ends meet, the kind of work I never thought I'd have to do. It was humiliating, physically exhausting, and left me with little time or energy for anything else. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, my mind racing with scenarios, regrets, and increasingly dark thoughts. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was existential. It made me question my entire past, my place in the family, my parents' love, everything I had taken for granted. I felt like a fool, blind to the machinations happening right under my nose. Every interaction with the outside world felt tinged with this secret shame. I was the person whose family had cast them out. One particularly bleak Saturday, feeling utterly defeated, I started going through old boxes in my small apartment, boxes I hadn't opened since moving out of the family home years ago. They were full of relics from a past life, old school papers, forgotten books, dusty photo albums, random trinkets. I was looking for anything to sell, anything to scrape together a little more cash. It was a desperate act, born of hopelessness. I sifted through layers of memory, each object a reminder of a life that seemed increasingly distant. Tucked away at the bottom of one box, under a stack of old college textbooks, I found a small, sturdy wooden box. It wasn't ornate, just simple, well-made. It belonged to Grandpa. I remembered it vaguely, sitting on his dresser. I hadn't thought about it in years. It wasn't in his will. I must have just packed it up with my things, assuming it was just sentimental junk. Curiosity, a faint flicker of something other than despair, prompted me to open it. It wasn't locked. Inside, there were a few things: a smooth, gray stone that felt warm to the touch, a faded photograph of a young grandpa standing in front of a building with strange architecture, and a small, sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Grandpa's distinctive, slightly shaky script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a letter, not a will. It was more like a set of instructions. An account number. The name of a bank in a country I had never visited but recognized from Grandpa's stories. And a code, a sequence of numbers and letters that looked entirely random. Below it, a short, cryptic note in his hand. For a rainy day. Don't tell anyone. Especially not them. The world outside the dusty box seemed to hold its breath. A rainy day. This felt like a hurricane, not just a shower. Don't tell anyone. Especially not them. He knew. Somehow, Grandpa had known, or at least anticipated, the possibility of something like this. The cynicism I had felt towards the entire concept of family inheritance warred with a sudden, terrifying surge of hope. Could this be real? Could this be what I thought it was? The paper felt solid in my hand. The account number looked real. The bank name was reputable, albeit foreign. This was the turning point. It wasn't a grand realization in a lawyer's office or a dramatic confrontation. It was quiet, dusty, and filled with the faint scent of old paper. Grandpa, long gone, reaching out from the past. The despair that had been my constant companion didn't vanish, but it was joined by a fierce, protective resolve. This was my chance. My secret. A tool given to me by the one person who had truly seen me. The lawyer hadn't found this. Couldn't have found this. It was outside the family's known assets, outside their control. My strategy solidified in that moment, sharp and clear. I wouldn't fight them on their terms, wouldn't exhaust myself trying to reclaim what they had stolen. I would find out what this account was. And if it was what I dared to hope, I would use it. Not just to survive, but to build something they could never touch, never control, never take away. The fear was still there, but it was now tempered by a cold, quiet determination. I would follow Grandpa's instructions. And I wouldn't tell anyone, especially not them. Verifying the account was a process steeped in anxiety and secrecy. I couldn't go through my usual bank or contacts. I had to be careful, operate completely under the radar. The bank in the foreign country was a major institution, but navigating their international division was daunting. I used anonymous online resources to find their contact information, drafting emails late at night, paranoid about leaving a digital trace. I had to provide the account number, the code, and prove my identity through layers of documentation. Each step was slow, requiring notarized copies of documents, secure international postage, and agonizing waits for responses. Days bled into weeks. The initial flicker of hope was constantly threatened by doubt. Was it a defunct account? A trivial amount? A cruel joke from the past? Then came the email I had been waiting for, terse and professional. Confirmation. The account existed. It was in my name, solely in my name, established decades ago. The initial deposit had been made by my grandfather. There were instructions included on how to access funds, how to get statements. Holding my breath, I followed the instructions to view the account balance online. The number that appeared on the screen made my blood run cold, then hot. It wasn't a small sum. It wasn't just enough for a rainy day.
It was
substantial. More than substantial. It was a fortune. A quiet, hidden fortune that had been accumulating, growing, entirely separate from the family's visible wealth. Grandpa hadn't just left me something. He had ensured I had a secure, independent future, bypassing the very structures my parents controlled. The rainy day he spoke of was here. And he had given me the means not just to weather the storm, but to build a new house entirely, on land of my own choosing. My lawyer was the first person I told, and only after I had absolute confirmation and initial access to the funds. I walked into his office, the same office where I had felt the crushing weight of despair just weeks before. I didn't show him the balance initially. I just explained calmly about Grandpa's box, the note, the overseas account. He listened, his professional skepticism evident but contained. Then I showed him the access credentials, the confirmation email, and finally, with a steady hand, I brought up the balance on his computer screen. The air in the room changed instantly. His eyes widened. The polite composure cracked, replaced by genuine astonishment. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, running a hand through his hair.
"This
changes everything." It didn't just change everything, it inverted it. My parents and Mark thought they held all the cards. They had consolidated power, secured their legacy, and left me powerless, dependent, and cut off. They assumed my only recourse was a futile, expensive legal challenge they were confident I couldn't afford or win. They believed they had won. This account, Grandpa's silent, deliberate gift, meant they hadn't just failed to leave me destitute. They had, through their actions, inadvertently pushed me to discover a resource that made their carefully orchestrated control irrelevant. Their betrayal hadn't destroyed my future. It had redirected it towards an even more independent and prosperous path. The irony was a bitter, satisfying taste in my mouth. The plot twist wasn't just having the account. It was using it as leverage, as silent vindication. I didn't immediately go public or file new lawsuits using the funds. That wasn't Grandpa's way, and it wasn't mine. His instruction was clear. Don't tell anyone. Especially not them, not until the right moment. I started quietly. Using the newfound resources, I stabilized my life. Paid off debts. Secured a comfortable place to live. Took care of my health, physical and mental, which had suffered immensely under the stress. I continued working, but the fear was gone. I had options now. Leverage. I orchestrated the confrontation carefully. I contacted my parents, asking for a meeting. I didn't mention the account. I just said I wanted to talk about the family's future, perhaps suggesting I was looking for some kind of settlement or ongoing support, playing the part of the dispossessed, seeking crumbs from their table. Mark was there too, of course, radiating smug confidence. They greeted me with a practiced air of weary tolerance, as if my continued distress was an inconvenience. We sat in the same living room where they had delivered their initial blow. The air felt thick again, but this time it was charged with a different energy. Theirs was the complacency of victory. Mine was the quiet power of a hidden weapon. They spoke first, reiterating their position, offering patronizing assurances of future help, outlining Mark's brilliant plans for the business, plans that excluded me entirely. Mark chimed in with comments about how he was handling everything now, how stressful it was, hinting at the vast responsibilities he carried, contrasting it with my presumably simple life. They seemed utterly convinced of their complete control over my situation, over my future. They believed I was entirely at their mercy, needing whatever scraps they chose to throw my way. I let them talk. Let them finish. Let the silence stretch, thick with their unspoken triumph and my feigned vulnerability. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make accusations or plead for fairness. I just looked at them one by one. My father, with his steady, cold gaze. My mother, avoiding my eyes. Mark, with that arrogant smirk fixed on his face.
And I spoke.
Not about their betrayal. Not about the lost assets. I spoke about Grandpa. I spoke about the values he instilled in me, values that seemed to have skipped a generation. I spoke about his quiet wisdom, his foresight. Then I pulled out my phone. I didn't show them the balance yet. I just showed them the bank's name on the screen and the account number. You thought you had accounted for everything, I said, my voice low and steady. Every asset, every possibility. You thought you had left me with nothing but what you decided to give me. Mark's smirk faltered slightly. My parents exchanged a quick, uneasy glance. They didn't recognize the bank name, not immediately. It wasn't part of their world, their network of local institutions. Grandpa, I continued, watching their faces, was a wise man. He understood things. He understood people. He planned not just for a smooth transition for the business, but for fairness, for real security, for a future that couldn't be controlled or taken away by others. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Years ago, he established an account. Overseas. Quietly. Entirely in my name. I saw the dawning comprehension in my father's eyes, the flicker of fear. My mother's hand went to her throat. Mark's smugness completely evaporated, replaced by confusion, then alarm. That's impossible, Mark blurted out, his voice suddenly rough. All of Grandpa's assets were folded into the family holdings years ago. We checked everything. Did you check everything? I asked, my voice still calm, but with an iron edge. Did you check the places he only spoke about in whispers? The places outside your carefully constructed world. I unlocked the screen fully now, navigating to the account overview. Grandpa called it something for a rainy day. I turned the screen towards them, just enough for them to see the numbers. The balance. The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. My father's face went ashen. My mother gasped, a choked, desperate sound. Mark leaped out of the armchair, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What is that?" he roared, pointing at the phone. "Where did that come from?" "That's not possible." "It's very possible," I said, pulling the phone back, my hand not shaking this time, but steady as a rock. "It's Grandpa's rainy day fund." And as you can see, Grandpa prepared for quite a storm. The number on the screen was not just significant. It was more than the combined value of the assets they had so ruthlessly transferred to Mark. Their elaborate scheme to disinherit me, to leave me powerless and dependent, hadn't just failed. It had backfired in the most profound way imaginable. While they were busy divvying up their kingdom and casting me out, I already possessed a greater one, given to me by the man who saw through their machinations. The air crackled with their shock and fury. Accusations flew. "You knew!" Mark shrieked. "You were hiding this. You planned this." My parents stammered, demanding to know how, when, why. "Grandpa planned it," I corrected, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. "He planned for a time when I might need true independence. A time when the people I should be able to trust the most proved untrustworthy." I looked at Mark, the man who had gloated over my perceived ruin. "You wanted to cut me out? To leave me with nothing? Congratulations. You succeeded in taking the assets you controlled. But you pushed me to find what was truly mine." The climax wasn't a shouting match, but the quiet delivery of undeniable truth that shattered their reality. They were blindsided, not by karma arriving later, but by the immediate, irrefutable proof that their victory was hollow, their control an illusion, and the person they thought they had crushed was standing before them, independent and holding the key to a fortune that dwarfed their own machinations. The look on their faces, the raw, naked shock and the dawning horror of realizing their plan had blown up in their faces, leaving them with their ill-gotten gains but zero power over me, was more satisfying than any amount of money. The plot twist wasn't just that I had money, it was that the money was Grandpa's, hidden precisely to protect me from them, and it was enough to make their actions irrelevant to my financial future, completely undermining their objective of disempowering me. They had played a game of control and lost everything that mattered beyond the paper assets. Walking out of that house felt different this time. The air was still heavy, but the weight wasn't on my shoulders. It was left behind me, settling over the people who had tried to break me. There was no shouted farewell, no dramatic exit, just me standing up, pocketing my phone, and walking towards the door as they sat there, stunned into silence, their faces masks of disbelief and fury. The click of the latch as I closed the door behind me sounded like a final period at the end of a long, difficult sentence. The aftermath wasn't a neat, happy ending, but something more complex, more real. The initial shock wore off, for them and for me. They tried reaching out, their tone drastically changed. My father called, his voice strained, talking about reconciliation, about family. Mark sent texts, a mix of anger and strangely conciliatory language, asking how we could sort this out. Sort what out? They had made their choices. I didn't answer the calls or texts immediately. I needed space, time to process. The victory felt
Cold.
sweet. Yes, the satisfaction of seeing their faces, of reclaiming my power, was immense. But it was layered with a profound sadness for the family I had lost. They weren't just people who had tried to steal from me. They were my parents, my brother. The betrayal had severed something fundamental, something that couldn't be easily reattached, even with the glue of Grandpa's fortune. I used the resources from Grandpa's account wisely. Not on lavish spending, but on security, on establishing a life completely independent of them. I moved quietly, without telling them where. I invested for the long term, building a foundation that no one could shake. I took a break from work, not out of necessity, but to heal, to figure out who I was without the shadow of their expectations or the burden of their betrayal. The lawyer helped set up structures to manage the funds discreetly, ensuring my privacy and security. They eventually found out I had moved. There were more attempts at contact, more appeals to family, tinged with an undercurrent of wanting to know exactly how much I had, how I was accessing it. I responded eventually, a carefully worded email stating that while I hoped they could find peace, the trust was broken, and I needed distance. I didn't gloat about the money, but I didn't hide that I was financially secure, thanks to Grandpa. I made it clear I wasn't seeking anything from them, nor did I require their help. Mark continued to manage the family business, the assets they had given him. From what I heard through distant family friends, things weren't as smooth as he'd predicted. The weight of expectation, the lack of true partnership, perhaps the corrosive effect of their actions, took its toll. I didn't feel triumphant about that, just a sense of inevitability. They had prioritized control and wealth over family and fairness, and perhaps the cost was higher than they anticipated. My own life is different now. The fear is gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. The loneliness lingers sometimes, a ghost to the family I thought I had. But it's a different kind of loneliness than the despair I felt before. It's the solitude of independence, not isolation. I travel now like Grandpa did, seeing the world he spoke of. I've learned that true security comes not just from money, but from knowing who you are, from having the strength to stand on your own, even when the ground beneath you is deliberately shaken. Grandpa's account wasn't just wealth, it was freedom. Freedom from their control, their expectations, their toxic definition of family. It was his last lesson to me. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes from having a resource they don't even know you possess, allowing you to walk away and build your own world. The future is uncertain, as it always is, but for the first time in a long time, it feels like my own. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. And if you're still here, thanks for listening. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.